let's do our March and April reading wrap-up, shall we? So I do bi-monthly reading wrap-ups because I don't read enough to do them monthly. So in March and April, I read 5 books and I had a really good 2 reading months. So on March 3rd, I finished Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. That book was published in 1928. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was kind of hard to get into, but I ended up liking it. It's about this couple and the man is impotent and basically they can't have kids because he can't have sex. And the Lady Chatterley, really wants kids. So they basically come to an agreement where he lets her cheat on him so that she could have kids in the hopes that they together would raise the child. And Lady Chatterley starts sleeping with their gamekeeper and ends up falling in love with him. It talks a lot about class since they're really rich and he's not. So it's kind of like a forbidden affair. She thinks that he would rather her be sleeping with someone who has more money, not the gamekeeper. And at the beginning of the book, you can see that she's like trying to convince herself that she's still in love with her husband, but by the end of the book, she completely resents him. So I really liked seeing that transition. But again, because it's so old, the language was kind of hard to read, so I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it. I wasn't like dying to read it, but like it was fine. Then I read Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. And it quickly became one of my favorite books of all time. James Baldwin is a really famous writer who is from, I believe he's from New York and lived in Paris for a little bit during that like expat era. And the book is about David, who is an expat that's living in Paris, and he meets this man, Giovanni, at a restaurant where Giovanni was the waiter, and they form a relationship. But David has a woman that he's going to marry. Her name's Hella, I don't really know how to say it, but she's in Spain. And she's like finding herself in Spain, so this is during their time apart. And throughout the book, David is really struggling with his sexuality, as you can imagine he would be at the time. And he starts to resent Giovanni, saying that Giovanni seduced him because he is so ashamed of his love for him. He thinks Giovanni opened the floodgates into him being gay. And David was definitely a really frustrating main character because as a reader, you know where his resentment is coming from, but you can also understand it. I also love the descriptions of Paris in this book. I lived there for a couple months, like many years ago, and I could picture everything exactly. It definitely made me miss it. And the reason it's called Giovanni's Room is because Giovanni had this tiny, tiny room in Paris and they spent a lot of time in it together. And because the room is so small, they both feel trapped in it. So the room and feeling trapped represents David feeling trapped in his sexuality. But yeah, I gave it 5 stars. The writing was so beautiful. I highlighted so many things. I really, really recommend it. Then I read A Court of Mist and Fury and I gave this 4 stars. I loved it. The descriptions are incredible. It was so much better from the first book. It was pretty long. Like, I wish it was shorter. It definitely took me a while to read, but I have to say it was pretty interesting the whole time. Like, there weren't really any slow moments. Like, there was always something huge happening in the plot. I don't really want to say much because it gives away, you know, what happened in the first book, but I did do a reading vlog on the first 2. I will continue the series, but I'm not like dying to read the next book, so I'm going to read a couple books in between. Okay, so then I read The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, which I gave 4 stars. And the reason I picked this up was because Gabrielle Zevin wrote it, who also wrote Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and that's one of my favorite books of all time. So I was just really excited to read something else of hers. I read this entire book on the plane to Singapore. It was so heartwarming and cute. So it's about this man named A.J. Fikry who lives on this small island called Alice Island, and he owns a bookstore called Island Books, and the bookstore is not doing well. He's trying to figure out how to boost the sales, and he's a widow, so he has this very grumpy persona, as you can imagine. And one day he finds a baby just left on his doorstep and then like has to figure out what to do with it, and it completely changes his life. And also at the beginning of the book, he has this very rare Edgar Allan Poe collectible book, and he gets drunk one night by himself and wakes up in the morning and the book is gone. So he works with the town police officer, who is also his friend, to try to find what happened to the book. And he also meets a love interest in it, so it's about their relationship. It's just a really heartwarming, feel-good story. It's a really quick read. So then I read The Girls by Emma Cline and I gave it 4 stars. So this book is loosely based on the Manson family murders, but it's called The Girls for a reason. It really focuses on the psychology of the girls and coming of age story of the main character, and essentially what led the girls to join the cult. So the protagonist is a 14-year-old girl named Evie Boyd, and she is neglected by her divorced parents. So it's funny because at the beginning of the book, I like didn't think her mom was that bad, and I was like, oh my god, she's just complaining because her mom has a boyfriend. Like, she needs to grow up. But then as the book goes on, you see how her mom is actually just neglecting her and only hanging out with her boyfriend. And it's really interesting because even though the cult is evil and the man that runs it, that's like Charles Manson character, his name is Russell, and he's having sexual relations with all the girls still would rather be there than at their family home. And we meet all the girls and I'll learn a little bit about their backstories. So basically Evie has seen these girls around town and is completely enamored by them, and then she meets Suzanne one day and Suzanne takes her back to the ranch where Russell lives there and all the girls live there. She becomes completely enamored by Suzanne, and Suzanne takes her under her wing a little bit, but you could tell Evie is just fighting for her attention. And it's just the story about Evie's summer, what she was doing at the ranch up until the murders happened, and how she was feeling after the murders happened while she was seeing the news on television. It's also a dual timeline, so it's back when she was 14 and the summer was happening, and now, and it's narrated by current Evie, which I really liked because she's a little more reflective of what was happening to her. The writing was beautiful, but it did kind of take me a while to read. Like, it put me in a reading slump just because it's not a page turner, you know? And I looked up and read a couple articles about this book because I wanted to see how accurate it was based on what actually happened, and I found this really good article by The Cut that I'll link down below. But it was essentially saying that this book was like a safer version than what actually happened in the cult. So for example, there wasn't that much sexual violence within the cult in the book, but there was in real life. So because of that, I found this more a coming of age and like a psychology story than a true depiction of what actually happened. And right now I just started Cleopatra and Frankenstein, so that will be in my next reading wrap up. But let me know if you've read any of these and what you thought of them. Also let me know if you've read anything recently that you've really liked. But thanks for watching. Bye!